Well, welcome. My name is Anthony Chow. I'm the director of the San Jose State School of Information. It gives me great joy and pleasure to welcome you to today's event. The title of our event is Women's Heritage Month, Women in Information, and this is part of our EDI series sponsored by the iSchool. I'm sincerely grateful to our distinguished guests that are here with us today, especially our two co-moderators and keynote speakers, both of whom I've had the privilege of working very closely with and learning from, and who I consider friends. The same can be said about most of the panelists. A recognition of Women's History Month first began in March 1981, and March was formally recognized by Congress as Women's History Month in 1987 with the intent to celebrate the contributions women have made to the United States and recognize the specific achievements women have made over the course of American history in a variety of fields. Today, and our impressive speakers will certainly honor this goal. We will start with the keynote conversation, followed by our distinguished panel. But first, let me introduce you to our co-moderators, Sandy and Sanda. Dr. Sandy Hirsch is Associate Dean for Academics in the College of Professional and Global Education at San Jose State University. She has previously served as professor and director of the SJSU School of Information and has worked in the Silicon Valley at HP Labs, Microsoft, and LinkedIn. She is past president of the Association for Library and Information Science Education and the Association for Information Science and Technology. She also holds leadership roles in the American Library Association and in the International Federation of Library Associations and Institutions. She is an ASIS distinguished member. She co-founded and co-chairs the Global Virtual Library 2.0 Conference Series. Dr. Sanda Erdelez is a professor and interim dean of the College of Organizational, Computational, and Information Sciences at Simmons University in Boston. She received her LLB and LLM degrees from the University of Utrecht Law School, and I apologize, Sandy, if I mispronounced that, Sanda, if I mispronounced that, and PhD in Information Transfer from Syracuse University. Dr. Erdelez is former Fulbright Scholar and recipient of the Texas Excellence Teaching Award and the Elise Pratt Severn Faculty Innovation Award. Her research interests include human information behavior, human-computer interaction, and usability evaluation in online environments. She has been internationally recognized for her pioneering research in the areas of information encountering and opportunistic discovery of information. She is an active member of the Association for Information Science and Technology. And in 2015, Dr. Erdelez received the Outstanding Contribution to Information Behavior Research Award from SIG-USE and also became a member of the SIG-USE Academy of Fellows. She currently serves as the chair of the iSchools organization, where she is one of the leaders of the Women's Coalition. So join me in welcoming Dr. Sandy Hirsch and Sandy Erdelez.
Thank you so much, Anthony, for that great introduction and welcome. I am so excited to be here today, and it's such an honor to have the opportunity to talk with all of you and to talk with all of these wonderful women that we have on this panel today. So I'm excited right now to kick things off with a conversation with Sanda Erdelez, someone I've known for quite a long time. She and I have, among other things, served on the ASIS board of directors together, and also have led some sessions around the Elise Leadership Academy together, among many other things. So it's exciting to have the opportunity to talk with her today on this for this symposium. So why don't we go ahead and get started? And so, Sanda, let me first ask you to talk a little bit about what made you decide to pursue your career in library and information science. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Great. Thank you so much, Sandy. And I kept giggling how much challenge we made to Anthony with our names, Sandy and Sanda and Sandra. Sorry, Anthony. But just like you, I'm excited to be here with all of you and have an opportunity to basically talk about myself and hear from your own stories. So I'm really looking forward to this 2 hours that we have ahead. Uh, so, how did I end up in this career stream? From some of those abbreviations that Anthony shared in my short bio, there is a secret code of me actually starting as a lawyer. I was trained to pursue a career in the field of law in my home country, Croatia. The name of my university is University of Osijek. And through the set of circumstances, as our career path takes us left and right, when I received the Fulbright Scholarship for PhD studies in the United States, I actually wanted to study a field related to law and information technology. But at that time, which was 1987, there was no law school in the United States that actually had a formal program in that area. Actually, one of the faculty members I interviewed while I was already here in the States at Harvard Law School said, law and technology, this is only what some of their third tier law schools do, because the major law schools can focus on the core law stuff, and the tier law schools have to follow the kind of things that are fashionable, but we don't do that here. Well, obviously, things changed. But this was the environment that I faced. I couldn't study what I seemed to like to study. And in Syracuse, they, as many of you know, have a very forward-looking information school. And it's there where I learned about library and information science, got hooked into it, and then followed step by step the process of become involved in LIS academia. Somewhere along the way, actually, I was hoping to pursue this career back in my home country. But in 1991, unfortunately, there was a civil war that emerged there that really impacted my decision to stay in the United States with my young family. And that's how I'm here, rather than being somewhere in the Croatia doing probably the same thing that I'm doing here. So this is my path. But I was always really curious to hear from Sandy. How did she navigate, working in private sector, in industry, coming to academia? So I'm going to ping pong the same question back to you, Sandy.
Well, thank you, Sanda. Yes. You talked about your own life twists and turns in your career. And, you think it's always, I always think back, I could tell a really clean story, as if it was always planned to go the direction I went. But, that isn't how things went either for me. And how I moved into industry and moving was also one of those kind of unexpected stories. Mm-hmm. Certainly when I got my PhD in library and information science, I never expected my career to take all the turns that it did. Yes, I came into industry from being in academia. I was a professor at the University of Arizona in library and information science. And my husband, who had followed my career 2 times, to get my PhD and then to go be a professor, while I was teaching, he was working on his MBA at the University of Arizona. So he got recruited to move to Silicon Valley and for a job at HP. And so it was finally my turn to follow him. So that's kind of what led me in that direction. And the reality was that there were no academic positions available for me in library and information science at that time. There were no open faculty positions. So I needed to find something else to do. So that's what led me into industry, and how I ended up in an industry position. This is back in 1998, so it's a long time ago, when I didn't know anybody in the Silicon Valley. Is I used my network, and I reached out to my dissertation advisor, Christine Borgman, and she gave me 3 names of people to contact in the Silicon Valley, who I did. And after talking with the 3 of them, I ended up working at HP Labs for Eugenie Prime, which is how I know Deb Sayes, because she worked there as well. at HP Labs in the research library. And that was a great job for me. They created a position for me, and I became the director of the information research program there. And I had the best time working in research and development and working in collaboration with scientists and engineers. It was a big adjustment moving from academia to research and development, the focus on business, even in an R&D situation where you're looking at longer term horizons for business decisions and technology decisions, was still a huge transition from coming from academia, where you're really setting your own research and are working in a different capacity. But I worked there for, 6.5 years. And then I moved into working at Microsoft in consumer product development, which was another huge transition and major change. And I did that also because there were a lot of layoffs going on at that time. And my husband and I were both at HP, and I'm like, that's too much investment in one company. One of us needs to move. So I moved to Microsoft and in the Silicon Valley. And that was another huge transition. Working in the industry is not one size fits all. So working in research and development is really quite different than working in consumer product development, where you have very short cycles of timelines. So anyway, I worked at Microsoft and LinkedIn over a number of years, and that was great. But in my heart of hearts, I always wanted to return to academia. I never left academia because I wanted to. So throughout that whole time, I was always thinking, how am I going to get back to academia? How am I going to do it? So I made sure to maintain my research and publication records and staying involved in the professional associations, so that when and if an opportunity came my way to rejoin academia, I would be ready and primed to do so, which is what happened when I came back to academia at San Jose State as the director of the School of Information. So I couldn't have predicted any of those changes and opportunities, but I do think it is helpful to kind of be ready and open to those opportunities when they are available to you. Yeah. I'm going to move on to the next question, and I'd love to hear from you, Sanda. And I know you and I have chatted a little bit about this as well, is, what kinds of challenges or barriers have you encountered in your career as a woman? And, what have you done to overcome some of them? And do you have any advice?
Well, some of the challenges that I experienced started very early when I was still, even before I was in college. As I said before, I went through all my basic education in Croatia. And then after I got my master's degree, then I came with a Fulbright to the United States. So many of my formative years took place in Croatia, which actually at that time it was Yugoslavia. And those of you who are familiar with the geopolitical setup in the world, you know that at that time this was, let's call it a socialist country with, ways of life being organized that was pretty much different than we have it here. But one of the things that did happen is, because of trying to keep everybody equal in a sometimes strange way, there was initially a lot of pressure actually for young women to make sure they're at the table. Sometimes we look at those other political structures as being very negative compared to what we have here in the United States, but there are some parts of it that actually were quite interesting in terms of creating opportunities. So you get an opportunity to be elected, and I was politically active from high school as a leader of various youth organizations and this and that. But then you end up in the meetings where are mainly men, and many of them grown up adult men. So I would find myself in a situation in some major regional meeting, and I was like barely a teenager with a bunch of grown-up adult men in suits sitting around me, and then everybody would call me "you little one," which was so very early on. I experienced this kind of being a curiosity among in a men's society, even though there was an opening to be there. But once you were there, it was just like, should I say something? Are they going to make fun of me? So this was initially a big barrier, just getting the courage when everybody looked so different around me to say, well, actually, if I don't say something, nobody would hear me. So early on, I really had to work very hard to develop that courage to say something, that make sure that my voice doesn't tremble, to make sure that I kind of not only get the physical spot, but also a mental spot in discussion. Because, you would be steamrolled across the left and right with a lot of smiles. It's not that you would feel that you are neglected directly, but you can see the way how discussion is going. Nobody's actually paying attention. So you had to kind of fight for your presence. And I would say that this kind of skill is something that then pretty much stuck with me as I would go through various steps in my career. Not that it was always necessary, especially in our field, there are many women, as you see many around the table, but it was something that I could always kind of get back to, make sure that I could express my voice when something is being discussed, and also see that sometimes, even though formally you have a spot, you still need to fight for intellectual spot in some type of discussion. But then another set of barriers I feel were those compound barriers, because obviously once I decided to pursue my career in the United States, I had to go through all the steps of legalizing my presence as an international scholar. And it's a very complex process. And since I had legal background, I was crazy enough to actually take this on my own. I thought, well, why am I going to pay them $15,000 to do this? I can do this myself. Yeah, you can, but it took quite a bit of time and energy. So I felt there were many barriers on that side, just navigating the job opportunities as someone who didn't really understand the culture and processes here. But this was not unique to me as a woman. It was kind of a compounding impact of also being somebody who comes from another country who has to develop working presence in this country. So, and I'm actually sure that because you are native to this country, probably you didn't have that angle of issues, but there must have been some other barriers, I'm sure, that you have experienced. So I'm curious to see what happened on your side in your story of your career.
Oh, thank you, Sanda. Yeah, no, that's interesting because, that does really compound the complexity of what you are navigating, coming from another country, another language, another system, another culture, in addition to being a woman. So that does conflate and probably make things extra challenging. For me, I think that it's interesting because we work in library and information science, which is a female-dominated field and profession, yet, as we know, leadership roles are still not female, not equally represented. It's not proportional, the number of women in leadership roles compared to the number of women in the field overall. And certainly working in industry, it was also, while working maybe in the research library, for example, at HP Labs was very, more research, and it was more female dominated. The interactions that I had with others in research and development were primarily with men. And oftentimes when I was at Microsoft, I would be, even though I'm working on a user experience team at Microsoft, which might have more women on it, when you're working with the product teams and the engineering teams, it's almost all men, or the leadership in the meetings and the program meetings would be almost entirely men, and many times being the only woman. And so I think that there's all of those kinds of imbalances and power dynamics that are at play in terms of negotiating careers, even, still today. But I think, there's also, and you didn't really talk about this, but I'm sure there must have been incidences which made things challenging as well as a woman. For when your kids were young, I remember working, for example, at a company like Microsoft, which, in the Silicon Valley, super fast paced. At the time I was working there, and they may still be that way, but they conducted so much of their, the business was conducted via email. And if you weren't on email at the time when something was being discussed, the decisions would be made and you wouldn't have been part of it. So that's problematic if you are, have certain other demands that take your time. You have to take your kid to a doctor's appointment or something, and then you're away from the office for a few minutes, and then things are just moving ahead, even if without you having the input, or you have to run off to pick up your kids at 5:00 and they schedule a meeting for 5:30 that you can't possibly attend. So there's all those kinds of barriers and challenges of, and I'm sure you must have encountered things like that.
Actually, if I can just add, while I was navigating green card and all those legal processes, I was also in the process of expecting my second child. So it was just like a nightmare of how everything was coming together. And then on the top of it, for some reason strange, I just didn't even assume that as a part of the health care plan, you wouldn't get automatically some time off after you have a baby. I just didn't even cross my mind. Just to realize that at that time I was at University of Texas at Austin, that my tenure clock wouldn't automatically stop unless I stop working. So it was just like one blow after another at the same time. Which was really difficult psychologically to bear, when these kind of compound barriers come. So I can definitely associate with concerns about also being a mom at the same time.
Yeah. And, one of the things I think that I've seen happen, I wonder if it's happened to you as well, is oftentimes, trying to get, you talked about your voice and finding your voice in meetings from a younger age, but do you still encounter situations where you're in a meeting with maybe a lot of men, and then you try to break into the conversation, or get out, or you say something and then it isn't really picked up in the conversation, and then somebody else says what you just said, and then everybody's like, "Oh yeah, that's a great idea." Have you ever had scenarios like that?
Yeah, it happens still regularly, and I know there was a question on the chat. How did I overcome this? Well, first way is kind of creating awareness that this is happening. Because it took me a while to see, well, everybody's talking and I'm not, am I afraid or no, I'm not afraid. So And once I became aware that I actually nobody's going to call me, that was the first awareness. Then I said, okay, if they're not calling me to talk, I need to say something. Okay, when I'm going to say it. So I'm going to at least talk once, because initially I was scared. So I have to talk once. Whenever that once is, I'm going to talk. And then I realized that usually there is a lull at the beginning of conversation before it all kind of steams up. So I would then try to say whatever I said once at the very beginning, at least, while everybody was still quiet, to make sure that my voice is heard. So this was the kind of little psychological trick that helped me initially. And then later on, it was getting easier and easier, but it still happens that you need to, make sure that your voice is heard, and you kind of see that your words end up being repeated by somebody who gets recognized, but you basically said the same thing a few minutes ago. So yeah, I don't have a solution for that.
It happens to me too. I think that the question, that was posed, any advice or tips for overcoming imposter syndrome, I think that, I think we all, probably struggle with that a little bit, at different times. And, I liked the tips that you shared, Sanda, for jumping in at the lull at the beginning. For me, I like to be really prepared. So I know for me, preparation gives me confidence. And so that I know what my point is, I've thought it through, I can be express it well. I feel like I know what I'm saying. So for me, preparation gives me confidence and helps me speak up. But I also sometimes play little games with myself like that too. Like, just say something, or, just, try to break in. But sometimes it can be hard to break in to those conversations, I find. So do you have any other advice for women to overcome some of these kinds of challenges?
Actually, it's completely understandable. The younger you are in your career, if you're at the beginning of a career, you have less confidence in your expertise. So we just need to accept this is not unique for women. I think everybody is in the same position, even though I feel that some men tend to overcome this much sooner rather than women, maybe because of their upbringing, some type of other, cultural experiences that they have. So it's normal to feel less confident early on. So I would not find there are some special tricks. The more you know, more confident you will get over time. And then at some point, you just know that you are a specialist in your area. You are the one. You need to remind yourself, I am the one who got all these things done. I have a PhD. I'm accomplished this. I'm accomplished that. Therefore, I need to claim rights to be here, and I belong here. So it's a little bit of a pep talking. Is helpful, not like Rocky. We don't need to do that. But, self-recognition, I think it helps, especially if you enter some of the, a big stakes meeting. I think that always helps as a little bit of trick how to get through some of these situations.
Yeah. And I'm constantly thinking about my style, how I come across. Like, I do know, for example, that my natural inclination is to ask a lot of questions, and that can, some people find that like as if I'm challenging them, or, and when I don't mean that at all, I'm actually just helps me to understand the context, to know how to interpret what's happening. And so I tend to ask a lot of questions. And I think that, over the years, I've learned, at the end of the day, you kind of have to be who you are, but try to read the room and to try to interject in ways that you think will be heard the most effectively, I guess, is what I try to do.
Yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned that, because one of my personal obstacles that I think is part of my professional training and research interest in usability evaluation is to look for problems. So when somebody comes with some idea, and everybody says, this is great, we need to do this, the first thing that comes to my mind is what might be a problem and why this may not work. And actually, honestly, I was an hour ago in a meeting at the Dean's Council exactly with this scenario. For the very first time this year, Simmons University is going to try the automated announcing of the names of the students. And there is a system that would allow, instead of somebody reading the name from the card, that is pre-recorded, that allows everything to move very smoothly according to the short video that we saw. And as somebody who always looks at problems with technology, my antennas just went like a mile and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this is such a high stake event. Once in a lifetime of all the hundreds of people there, what if something goes wrong? So I kept thinking, okay, we need to pretest this. We need to a real full pretest, not some little demo pretest. So, and I'm still very anxious about it. Actually, you probably see how I feel, but everybody was so positive about it. And I was the only one, basically, who said, I'm concerned and worried. And sometimes I'm wondering how this comes across when you are the only one coming with the negative scenario where everybody is, this is so great. And it's a kind of challenge that we all need to be aware how we approach this type of situations and what strengths or weaknesses we might have. I still don't know if this is a weakness, but I definitely see that it comes across maybe as not being a team player occasionally when I come with these.
Yeah, and I know what you mean about that. There's an interesting comment in the question that was posed in the chat that I wanted to see if you had any thoughts about when people make comments like, you have such a pretty face, or do you have anything to say? Any kinds of comments like that, which, unfortunately, I think many have experienced. And do you have any thoughts about how to handle a situation like that?
Again, I think my approach to addressing this really changed over time. When I was younger, I felt very uncomfortable. And obviously, when you are younger, you get more comments of that kind. And I tried not to pay too much attention to it. I would try to have it slide and not show on my face either that I feel embarrassed, but I still felt uncomfortable. However, as a little bit of experience kind of piled on, the way I would then respond would be to come up with some kind of a compliment that goes backwards. And I say, well, and your hair looks great too, and look at your shoes, or whatever I could find appealing potentially. So just to say, the same way I could get a compliment, I could share a compliment and just not make it a kind of an awkward situation. So sharing compliments or being in this exchange at some point didn't really become a problem. But what was really, really seriously an issue was more when the men would try to physically somehow get closer in either hugging or, touching hair. it was really a bit of having like a PTSD when, you try to find a spot where you can always get out so that you are not cornered, kind of keeping something in between, like a set of books or whatever you are carrying in between. So there is this lack of spatial opportunity to be, just even touched, because we don't necessarily want to be even touched, like patted or by strange people. So this other set of issues was something that really bothered me longer than just oral comments that I found a way around early on. And I'm sorry I turned this question into more of a heavier discussion, but it's a practical question that many women, and especially young women, experience.
It is, and it's not just in our field. It happens all in lots of fields, and it's an important issue to discuss. So I'm glad that the question was raised. I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next question, though, and that is that you are, as you mentioned, you're the chair of the iSchools organization, and you just came from a meeting, I think, related to that. So what made you decide to want to serve in a role like that? It's a big job, so it's a big responsibility on top of your already big jobs that you hold. Yeah. So what made you decide to do that?
I felt that I've been growing through my career and dealing with different levels of responsibility, and coming with this very strong international background, I felt that I'm really well prepared and positioned to lead iSchools organization that is very much international. We have 125 members from all around the world. So it's these institutional members. So just having that capacity, I felt would be beneficial to organization itself. And also, again, being a woman, majority of people who are currently leading these iSchools are men. There are only a handful of women. So when the opportunity came, I thought, well, I'll put my name in the hat, and I feel that I can do it because I have all this experience. It's a kind of work that I enjoy doing, and it's a challenge that I felt I was ready to take on, where I can also make a big contribution. But what I'm really curious, and this is the question that I was waiting to ask you. I know that you had multiple leadership roles in very, very prominent, most prominent organizations in our field. ACES, ALICE, IFLA, ALA. What motivates you to take, once you have one role, many people say, oh my gosh, I'm done. I'm glad I'm not doing this again, but not Sandy. You kind of did it all. What motivated you?
Well, well, I don't know. Maybe maybe it is a lot, but no. Honestly, I mean, it's also been a huge honor to serve in those capacities, and I've always found a really deep connection with and have deeply valued professional organizations. And I know we're going to talk shortly about kind of mentors and role models, but it actually falls in, I'm going to preemptively talk about that a little bit here too. I also, my mom was a librarian and very active and prominent in the field. And she was a leader, president of different association divisions, and she was very, very actively involved on the ALA executive board. And so I had a great role model who demonstrated the importance and value of engaging and supporting in your professional association. So it was very natural for me to gravitate in that direction myself. And, I personally derive so much value and benefit out of those professional associations, starting with, let's take ASIS, the Association for Information Science and Technology, for example. That association, which brings together academic, people from academia and industry together, and practice, actually, is a marriage of all of those different types of roles, and intersects and bridges across all of those different roles. So for me, ASIS, as I personally navigated in my career from academia to industry and back to academia, was the one professional association that could fit my whatever I was doing. And so for me, it was the one that I held on to throughout my whole career, and has really been a professional home. So when I had the opportunity to serve as the president for that, I viewed it as an opportunity to give back to the association, because I had derived so much value out of it. But also, I felt like I really knew the association too, and I had ideas of ways that I thought that could be helpful to the association, including helping set its strategic directions. I developed the strategic plan that got ASIS back onto its strategic plan, so it kind of knew where it was going. Those are some of the reasons, and I've always been seeking in my career the opportunities for what impact and influence. And how can I have impact? How can I influence and the direction? And those leadership roles really give you opportunities to help shape the direction of the association, and provide opportunities for others as well. And so it's for all of those reasons. And then I think that there was just enough time in between my serving as the ASIS president before I was approached. I think it was by Rong, actually, to consider running for a lease president. So I think if she'd asked me the year before, I said, no way. And then it was like another year went by, and I'm like, oh yeah, sure. Yeah, I kind of forgotten what all was involved. They are major responsibilities, but honestly, they have really given so much opportunity to, as I said, to hopefully give back some of what I've gained from those associations, and also to continue to learn and grow as a leader in our field. So I've loved all of those opportunities. I still do. Even as I became the associate dean for academics at San Jose State University, I actually said, I only want that role if I'm allowed to continue to engage in these kinds of professional activities that are important to me in the field. And I don't want to lose my connection to the field of library and information science. It's really important to me, and it helps fuel me and in certain ways that I'm not sure I can explain fully. And to lose that connection would not bring me joy. So I know that about myself. So I've continued in engaging deeply in these associations, and I pick and choose which ones I feel are important, and where I want to invest my energies and what I want to do within each one of those. So there's actually some common threads that you would see within those, in terms of professional education, professional development, helping to make sure people, international, there's like very common threads that run through all of those engagements.
Yeah, it's very clear. And just like you, ASIS has been my main professional association literally from the very first year I was here in the United States. It was a conference serendipitously that took place in 1987 in Boston. And all the group of us doctoral students from Syracuse said, we all are going to go to a conference. I had no idea where we are going, why we are doing this. It was my very first semester here in the United States. We all piled into a car driving together, and then a big northeaster came and we got stuck somewhere on the highway. So we couldn't, we literally were stuck in the snow, and I was completely unprepared. I still have pictures of me in a Snoopy t-shirt with Syracuse on it and sneakers, northeastern, no idea what northeaster is. So a lot of interesting memories from way back when. But ASIS is definitely also my main connection, association I want to be associated with, and Elise. But so wow, the time is really running by.
Yes. Well, I want to ask you about whether you have a role model or a mentor or someone who inspired you or someone that you admire that has also, maybe has broken down some barriers. Can you talk about that?
Yes, I gave some thought to this question that we prepared, and I was always a bit more internally motivated than looking outside for motivation. At least I thought I was, but then I thought, okay, is this really true? Who was somebody that somehow I navigated towards, and somebody that I was curious about? And then I definitely realized while I was growing up, strangely, somebody who really was a person who motivated me was a local, a woman who was a captain of, at that point, Yugoslavia handball team. She came from my hometown and actually worked in the same company where my father worked. So somehow he knew this lady directly. And she was a captain of the Yugoslav handball team. And the way how she carried herself, the way how she talked about her travels around the world and experiences that she had with people from various countries, and how much energy she invested in really becoming good in the sports in order to excel in that highest level was very inspirational. I thought, this is the woman of this energy, of all these opportunities, meeting people, traveling around the world. What can I do to be like her? Well, I didn't go in the direction of sports, but I definitely saw these opportunities. If you invest your energy into something, that the doors will open for you. So I invested my energy in learning, in academic pursuits. And interestingly, just a year ago, when I was visiting back home, I saw her on the bus. We were going somewhere together, and I reached out to her and said, you don't even know you were my model when I was growing up. And it was quite a nice exchange. And the other person is my mentor at Syracuse, Dr. Marta Dosa. She actually immigrated in 1950s from Hungary and came here to the States with her husband in a very difficult political context, had to establish herself as a scholar in library information science, mentored numerous international students. And she was somebody in this academic sphere that I always thought, if I stick with this career, this is how I would like to be perceived. This is how I would like to be recognized in research. These are the types of relationships I would like to have with international students, to support them, understand their needs, understand the needs of young family when you are, again, an international scholar and trying to figure out the system. She unfortunately passed, and I didn't learn about a year or two after that she did, but she was just such a great mentor and very, very warm person. So these are the two very opposite and different people that I saw as not maybe directly as models, at least not in my mind, but just the lives that I would like to somehow have, or somebody who has the kind of strength that I would like to have to do things that I'd like to do. And what about you? Who are the models, model figures in your life?
Yeah, well, as I alluded, so my mom was Gail Schlechter, and she was a leader in the field of library and information science, and for many years. And she was really somebody that I admired, not just as a mom, but as a professional, and as somebody who, was a time when things were especially really challenging as a single parent, with young kids, trying to navigate how to balance that without the same kinds of support systems that, that there are many more in place today than they were at the time when she was navigating things. And to find her way through the field, and then to her professional ethics and commitment, her commitments to the field, and her entrepreneurial spirit. She ended up starting her own publishing company to create award-winning reference books, with the very first book appropriately being the Directory of Financial Aid for Women. So that women could have the opportunities to go to college and to get education and to pursue their careers in that. She was just somebody who I admired, and I helped influence me in so many ways in terms, and she really did work to break down barriers for others, for women, for men, for others, to bring them along, and always mentoring, and somebody who was such a cheerleader for others. And I to this day, I still get people telling me how much a difference she made to that in their lives. So, so I think that for me, she's, I always keep her in mind and in my heart when I do things, and, try to emulate some of the kindness and generosity of her spirit that she demonstrated throughout her entire life. So, so I'd say she'd be the number one person that I have admired and strive to be like. Yes. Okay, we have, I think, a few more minutes. So I think what was that? 5 minutes. Yeah. Yes. So, I think this is a great way for us to wrap up our comments before we shift to the panel, the larger panel. And that is, as a leader in the field, how are you paying it forward and paving the way for other women to succeed?
Excellent wrap-up question. I think I do this 2 ways. One is in more of a personal way. So under any circumstance, as I'm working, collaborating with other women, especially with women who are maybe closer to beginning of their professional careers, academic careers, that I definitely try to share my experiences if I see that they are encountering some problems, and I may have had similar ones. Provide encouragement, provide examples, kind of makes space for them to feel comfortable to share their concerns. I've been doing this with numerous doctoral students, younger colleagues at all the institutions where I was. So this is more on the personal level, always trying to find time to connect beyond more official and type of professional level. But most recently, one initiative that I'm completely devoted to and very excited about is related to my role as a chair of the iSchools organization. We have started what is called the Women's Coalition, which is a coalition, and I think we can share a website at this point from the iSchools.org website. And this is a community within the iSchool that brings together women interested in leadership position in iSchool environments, so that we can, share experiences, have interesting programming initiatives. But most recently, we have started what is called a Four Squares program, leadership program, that would bring together groups of 4 to 5 women in a series of meetings and sessions where they share their stories and discuss themes that will be assigned as a topic of discussion. And we had a kickoff event during a virtual iConference last week. We have about 25 women who were selected for this inaugural cohort, and the enthusiasm among them and need for this type of peer-to-peer leadership mentoring is immense. So I'm all excited to be part of this program, get it going, and hopefully, grow it and bring more and more women through this process. And I guess I'll return the question to you.
That is super exciting, Sanda. I'm really thrilled to hear about that. And I think that's going to really be provide some great opportunities. For me, I'm always looking for ways to engage and support others. I'm very actively engaged in them. They're not always just targeted to women, but they may be targeted to students or to other people who are, breaking into, early in their careers, but looking for, so I'm very involved in a number of different kind of mentoring initiatives or coaching initiatives across multiple associations. But because I really feel like we need to bring the next generation along with us, and which is why I'm involved in academia anyway, is because I believe so passionately about that. But I also look for opportunities for ways to bring more women into the spotlight and provide more opportunities. So, for example, recently I was co-chairing the industry track for ASIS, for the ASIS conference, and we invited an industry panel that happened to be, not just happened, but it was all women. Because so many times, if there's going to be an industry panel at a conference, it's going to be either all men or it's going to be mostly men. But ours was all women, and it was great to have to showcase the kinds of contributions and roles that women are playing in information science in the fields, in the broader field. So looking for ways to bring along women, or to provide more opportunities, more space for women to shine and to show what we're contributing to the field. And then the other thing I just wanted to say is that sometimes I find, this is through some of the coaching or mentoring that I do with others, but I do find that sometimes women are given, information I think is really detrimental to their confidence or to their careers, like being told, for example, oh, you shouldn't have kids while you're working on, trying to get tenure, or there's no way for you to do X, Y, and Z thing. And, almost every single time I've done those very things, and you can do them. That doesn't mean they're easy. It doesn't mean they're challenging. It's not that necessary, but I think we have to like not listen to those external voices sometimes. And so hearing or providing an example of someone who has, no, you can do those things. It is possible, here's a way forward. I think so. Some of those kinds of things I hope are helpful as well to others, and just to see some examples that what is possible and what's doable. So I think that's another way that I hope I'm paving a little of the way forward as well. So we are at the top of the hour now. So I just want to give a huge thank you to Sanda for sharing her experiences and her perspectives. It has been fantastic. I've enjoyed hearing more and learning more about you as well. And it's been really great to have this opportunity to talk about these important topics.
And same for me. It was really a pleasure to have this exclusive hour to ask all the questions that I was curious about you.
That's fantastic. And now we get to switch gears a little bit to widen the conversation. And I am absolutely delighted that we have 4 fantastic speakers with us to engage in a panel discussion to build on some of these themes and to dive deeper and bring in more perspectives to some of the questions that we're talking about. And we have the benefit of having, as I said, 4 amazing women here who are applying their skills and their knowledge and expertise in a wide range of areas, from working in industry to working in academia to working in the library, leadership roles, and all doing amazing things. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to ask them to, as I said, kind of build on some of the, to provide their insights into some of the kinds of questions that Sanda and I have started to explore. So I'm going to turn it over to Sanda, and she's going to pose the first question to the panel. And I didn't introduce our speakers. So you saw them all on the agenda before I turn it over to you. We have Deb Says. She's the Senior Director of Learning and Communities at Elation. And I've known Deb for a long time, since I worked at HP Labs. Tiffany Deck, we're so delighted to have you. She's an alum of San Jose State University, and she is currently a customer success manager for SkillType, and she's had a really interesting career path as well, working a lot of different roles. And we have Dr. Ron Peng, and she is from Simmons University. She's a professor there. She works with Sanda. And Sarah Jones is the Washington State librarian, and I've had the pleasure of working with her as well, the Khalifa board and other roles, but she's had a very impressive career as well, and working in a lot of different states and different roles. So they have their bios are up. I don't want to take too much of our time away from hearing, and they could talk more about their own career path as Sanda introduces the first question. So welcome to our great panel.
Thanks, Sandy, for this great introduction for everyone. And yes, we're now turning tables from you listening to our panelists actually presenting about themselves. So the first topic that we would like to hear from each of you is more about your career path. You heard about Sandy's and mine, the many twists and turns. So what was yours? And what do you find inspiring about your current job? So let's start with Deb.
Yeah, hi, everyone. Such a pleasure to participate with you all in this. I am, as Sandy mentioned, I'm currently directing a team at a software company called Elation. We're a startup, so Silicon Valley speed, and we produce software for companies that you could think of as a catalog. It's a data catalog. We call it a data intelligence platform. And I have arrived here through a long path. I was going to be a cataloger. I was a tech services librarian when I was at HP Labs with Sandy. I ran our online catalog, and I graduated actually with a tech writing degree. I wanted to teach people how to write. And there was something about the intersection of the structure of a catalog against the strange complexity of trying to catalog knowledge and the softness and uncertainty of knowledge and the strict structure of a catalog that attracted me. And I followed my mentor, Eugenie, that Sandy mentioned, into a world of online digital. This was at the time they were hiring librarians at Yahoo to catalog the internet, if anybody remembers that. So I followed a path through organizing information and took my library degree into companies like Kaiser Permanente and eBay, where I started working with the data team. And my focus was on employee productivity. So if we assume that what we do as information specialists is help people find and understand information, and I extended that to data, we make their lives easier. And so now I work at a company where we sell software like that. And I do a bunch of other stuff, but I'll stop here to give other folks a chance to reply.
Well, I'll go next. My name is Tiffany Duck. Hello, everyone. I started out in the academic side of the house, and I quickly kind of switched over to public libraries. I worked in public libraries for a very long time. I love the public library. I always say I'm a public librarian at heart. And as Dr. Hirsch said, I've just been able to kind of bounce around and do a lot of different things. Currently, I'm a customer success manager for SkillType, which is a talent management software for libraries, and I absolutely love it. It's very inspiring because I basically get to work on and help build a platform that libraries may be using, for years to come. And it's just very exciting. It's fresh, it's new, it's challenging, but you also learn and grow that way. And I just want to give a shout out because it was actually Dr. Hirsch, I don't know if you remember, at 5 years ago at two of the SJSU receptions who told me to go for it. And I made that career pivot twice now with Dr. Hirsch's advice. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Okay, I'll go next. As they introduced earlier, I'm Ron Tam, currently a full professor at Simmons University School of Library Information Science. I'm also actually the current president for Association for Library and Information Science Education, which Sandy was the past president for. So I actually have similar path with Sanda, not necessarily in the legal field, but I came from mainland China. I have a graduate degree from in Chinese literature, and I was a reporter, actually interviewing foreign experts working in China before. And then I came, and then I had a degree from Wayne State for Library Information Science master degree, and I went to University of Chapel Hill, University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill for my PhD. And I started working in academia since 2000, January 2000. So I worked in academia for 23 years plus. I'm not going to date myself in terms of my age, but in terms of inspiration I get from a work, working in academia, typically you talk about three aspects, research, teaching, and services. I do get inspiration from all three aspects. But in particular, I'm passionate about research, so I can, this semester I'm actually on sabbatical. I can just do research without teaching. It's not that I don't love teaching, but, being 100% immersed into research is, also fascinating to me. The inspiration I get in terms of service is actually working on several initiatives that's actually community driven. So I've been involved in research data management library academy, and its related initiative. It's really community driven, open learning platform. And it was really my partner in this initiative is Eileen Martin. It's also she's also inspiration to me. We work together on put forth all this initiative, and Sanda is very close to have the knowledge of what we are doing. We collaborate a lot. So my thing is, I do feel that the inspiration is I'm in a position of being empowered to be able to make a difference. Okay, so now that's me.
All right. Well, hello, everyone. My name is Sarah Jones, and I'm the Washington State Librarian currently. And as mentioned, I've had a varied career really in two places as public library directors. Started as a children's librarian quite some time ago, but ran 3 public library systems. Most recently, I was the Marin County Library Director there in the Bay Area. And then I came over here to be the Washington State Librarian. I'd also been the state librarian in the state of Nevada. And at that point in time, I was also in charge of archives and public records. So all executive public records. So just a large variety of things. And I think going back and forth between public libraries and state libraries has been public libraries. I like the energy of being close to exactly what's going on and supporting all the library workers and the services that we provide. And then at the state library, you get to be more of a supportive role in terms of all state libraries manage federal money. It's not a huge amount, but it's an amount that really does leverage a lot of difference. So as I said, I've gone back and forth in those 2 roles, liking them each very much, and then sometimes thinking, well, I should be in the other role. But I became the Washington State Librarian in February of 21, and really interesting to change jobs in the middle of the pandemic. I don't know how many other people did that. It's kind of hard because the way we network and join with others has been very different. As far as career path, it was interesting hearing that. As a young person and in college, I expected to be a lawyer. I wanted to go to law school, and then life happens, which also kind of aligns with what other speakers have said. I got married, and I wasn't in a place where going to law school was actually a practical situation. So I ended up going back and becoming a reading and English teacher. And I did that really kind of briefly, and then lucked into being I was just doing a supporting role in a public library and a children's library. And then, along the way, children's librarian director. And when I became director, they said, hey, you need a master's degree in library science. And so I got one at Syracuse University, which was a really wonderful school. I got such a wonderful education there. And I've been adjacent to academia. I attempted finishing a PhD, spent 10 years at University of North Texas, didn't get it done, taught at San Jose State University, taught at University of North Texas. But really, the goal there was not to become a full-time professor. It was really to teach in ways that I could help at the practitioner level, because I think there's a lot of need for that. What inspires me right now is a kind of a twofold thing. One of the reasons I took the job at the State Library in Washington is we provide library services to incarcerated individuals. So we have 13 libraries in minimum, maximum youth detention and psychiatric hospitals. So we embed a public library, not the law library component, that is separate in each of these institutions. So it inspires me every day, because library services make such a difference, but you can only imagine what they make, the kind of difference they make to incarcerated individuals. And then secondarily, I would say what is inspiring me right now is also troubling me is the national book challenges. We are seeing them in our own state. The idea that we are at a place where a certain group of people want to choose what everyone can read and cannot read. And it isn't just about that. It's very much about marginalizing communities and othering people and, being discriminatory. So I'm inspired that we are galvanizing to make sure that we combat this problem and do something to ensure that everyone has the right to read.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you all. And Sarah, I also changed my job, my role at least at San Jose State at the start of the pandemic, March 2020, which was also when the university closed. So not quite changing states and roles, but I kind of know what you mean about changing jobs during the pandemic. Okay, well, thank you so much. You guys have all had such really interesting careers and are doing such interesting things. You heard me and Sanda talk some about some of the challenges that we've encountered as women in our roles. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about any challenges or barriers that you may have encountered as a woman. And if so, what are some of the ways that you've tried to overcome those? And also whether you have any advice for women. So I'm going to go ahead and start with Tiffany this time.
All right. So yes, short answer is yes. One big area in library management, public library management, a lot that most would probably traditionally consider a male-dominated industry is facilities. And for a long time, I was directly responsible for facilities. I was able to advocate for a few renovations and new parking lots, but it comes with a lot of challenges with, who you work with. And sometimes, I was always, not always, but a lot of times, your decisions kind of dismissed or kind of pushed to the side when you made decisions about how you want things to look, especially with the, small renovation or things like that. And so that was really a shocker for me. Just wasn't expecting it. And I really had to learn how to navigate those types of situations throughout the years and stand up for myself and be firm in your decisions and, kind of, repeat things and those sorts of things. And as someone brought up before in the questions, the comments, definitely have experienced that with, working with different folks in the industry. And then sometimes getting credit. I feel like, there's been times where you feel like you just worked really hard on something, or other women as well. You see people working really hard on a project, really hard on an initiative, and not really properly getting the credit for, what they've worked on. But to that, I would just say for all of that, advice, I would just say, gaining that confidence and experience through the years to just, be aware of what you're doing. People do pay attention. And I've noticed, I do this myself, where when you work hard in this profession, this is a service-oriented profession, whether most folks like to believe it or not, people see the work that you're doing. So even if you don't get, the award, even if you don't get the shout outs, a lot of people see the great work that's being done across the country. I know I see it all the time where I'm like, wow, they're doing such amazing things over at this library. Look at what this person's doing. So I would just say, if you, are connected to the mission and the service, you definitely will, get that recognition or know that people are seeing what you're doing. So.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Tiffany. Rong?
Well, talking about challenges and barriers, my first question is, how much time do you have? Apparently, we don't have probably just 2 seconds. What can I talk about? It's plenty for challenges and barriers that I have to go through. I mean, some of the things actually Sanda mentioned before, or Sandy mentioned before, in terms of family, balanced career, and me coming from as an international student, also this issue becoming a faculty issue of turning my legal status and so forth. But a main source of challenges and barriers is actually perception. So I, as a woman, I actually have multiple degrees. I have a master's degree from China. I have 2 master's degrees from the US. So when I was in the PhD program already, I have people directly laughing at me and saying, "You're a degree collector. What are you doing?" Well, there's a journey I went through to explore what I want to do, and also there's this practical issue of whether I can find a job majoring in Chinese literature, right? So there's this reality there. So you have to overcome that. Another thing is that I had something in common with Sandy is my husband's job. It's always difficult for us to find the same location because the LIS schools are limited. So I had to think about, there's twice I have to move because my husband's job also is limited in location. I'm not as lucky as Sandy, her husband actually initially sort of compromised with her. I had to sort of try to see whether I can go where my husband's job is. Again, his job is kind of limited in location. So changing job, not because I didn't get tenure, I was having poor midpoint review, that I have to leave the school. But the perception out there, because people don't know what's behind it, and the perception out there is, oh, you couldn't get tenured in a location, so you moved twice. That's far from the truth because my annual evaluation was very quite good, but that's actually a huge thing. People have this impression of you and the chat, behind your back, and sort of you have to being able to stay tough and kind of don't mind that. Another thing I'm constantly struggling is also I'm struggling also today is the workload and personal health. How do you do work-life balance, but making sure I'm healthy and being able to contribute to my work. I always tend to overwork and ignore my health. And then I end up with this bad situation that, I'm in a bad health situation that Sandra actually know very well, that I'm just in a tough situation that I have to keep back to get more healthy. So how to overcome them? Physically and mentally, you need to hang tough. You need to stand fast. You need to keep faith of yourself. You can overcome those obstacles. And for me, also, I rely heavily to my friends. I have a support system. I often chat with my friends. So, and then in terms of advice, pursue your passion. That's for sure. But also be realistic and build your own support system. And rely on your friends and colleagues to actually lend a helping hand when you're, not able to handle everything when things get tough, but just keep going forward. That's me.
Thank you, Rong. That was really great. I'm glad you brought up about the work-life balance. That is something that is so important to think about, and how you prioritize what you do is really important. Sarah, would you like to go next? Oh, you're muted.
That is the quintessential thing. You're muted. Well, I guess what challenges and barriers, I think they're pretty common. I do want to just say, I'm 30 plus some years in the library profession, and the men in the library profession are just wonderful to work with. It's I've always felt so supported and so on equal playing field with all the men that I've met in the profession in all the different places, and including I've had in general. When I came to the state of Washington, that was the first time I had a female boss. So the Secretary of State was a woman, and in all of that time, being library directors, whoever was the boss, the elected official, was always a man. So I thought that was an interesting change. But ironically, one of the barriers that I found when I came here is that this is the first time I didn't run information technology myself. There was a larger information technology group, and I was working with them. And the then director really was, it was terrible misogyny. I don't really know how to say anything different about it. I remember having a conversation with him where, it was just something kind of simple we needed to do. And he said, you're just a librarian and your people that you work with are just librarians and they don't understand information technology. And of course, that was super insulting because there's no such thing as just a librarian, in my opinion. And of course, we study information technology, and information management. And in my own institution here right now, probably a third of my folks have spent many have spent a pretty good part of their careers in Microsoft in a variety of different ways and other, technology companies here in the state of Washington. So that was pretty hard. And what was, I think, hardest about it is that working for allowing that to happen in an environment where the actual leader was a woman was really, really difficult. But luckily things changed, and that person decided, and I actually kind of look back of thinking, I think some of his pushback against us was he hadn't kept up himself with information technology. So it was easier to be dismissive of our needs. But the way that to overcome it, I think, is just, and I'd say this true about everything I've ever done in terms of talking, teaching, mentoring, is be credible. Because when you're credible, it changes everything. And that won't happen by just the moment you walk in the door. But as you build credibility, maybe someone that some people might not see it, but most will. And they'll understand your power and your force and your ability to do the work that you need to do. And then I just say, the other thing I would say is we just need to do a better job of what our skill set is, especially our technology skill set with our degrees, because it's profound. And but unfortunately, I don't think everyone knows that. And not only in technology, but in information management and themselves, there's a whole industry popping up about misinformation, disinformation. And you know what? We're mostly not at that table, which to me is pretty insane. So I think that part of this is our own issue of this profession needs to elevate our skill set there and be at those tables and be credible. So I think that's the advice I would give, is that, it's you're going to face these challenges, but you can find the allies, and then you need to, use your own knowledge and skills and abilities and ability to really get things done to build that credibility. And then you will be viewed in ways that I think are far more respectful.
Thank you so much, Sarah. It was amazing.
Oh, we saw you were going to.
Yeah.
Are you commenting?
Yep.
Go ahead.
I'm okay. Okay.
Is it me?
I'm sorry.
Deb was next. I wasn't sure if you were commenting on something Sarah was saying. No, it's Deb, go ahead.
Yes, I'd love to go ahead because I've thought a lot about this, and I won't go into all the ways in which I've experienced very similar situations that you all have described. And I think it's important to recognize, and for myself, I have not experienced sort of overt or painful situations as a result of being a woman. I have been denied promotion, I think, because of misogyny or harassment. So within the scope of the less overt or painful, I have experienced everything: condescension, ignorant, someone taking credit for my work. But I'm more interested, I'm more encouraged to talk about the ways that I deal with it. I've spent the last several decades working in technical situations, and often been not only the only woman, but the only person at the table with the business or personal or use case point of view, similar to a product manager sitting with a bunch of engineers. And it's not just, I think, because I was female that things were discounted, but because the technologists knew the answer. Technology was going to solve whatever problem they had. And my job was to deliver a point of view, either represent customer, as you must do, Tiffany, or becoming credible that my input to the potential solution for for the problem they were often trying to solve had to have the customer point of view or the user point of view, or the fact that we were building documentation or training on it. So some of the things that I did to not only sit at the table, but sit at the table and accomplish something. It's interesting that you say, Sanda, that you would speak at the beginning. I often wait till the end. The conversation dies down, and then I grab that wrap-up moment and solidify my point of view as the last statement. And I often find that's a very useful place to be. The other thing that I do is I pick my language very carefully. I don't use I don't use I feel, I believe, I think. I use the imperative. Often I do that in emails or in written things. I say use, take, assemble, build. This is not Deb's opinion. This is just absolutely the best practice, the strategic point of view, the solution we should apply. And so I take it out of the realm of me or my feelings or my thoughts, and I present it to everyone as just the best way for us to move forward. And then speaking of that us, the last thing I would say is that work is a sport, and you have to figure out whether you're in the middle of a team sport or a one-on-one. If it's a team sport, if that table that you're facing, that you're going into, align with everyone and in potentially one-on-one meetings before you go. I had a manager back at eBay, and he used to tell me, align, Deb. And by that, he meant, don't go into a meeting where you don't know what the rest of the people at the table will say. No. Make sure that they know your point of view and you've done your homework. Like Sandy says, go in with prepared. I think the relationships that you align and prepare with, and that one-on-one builds the credibility. And then you go into the meeting and you have a seat, and you just need to grab that last moment, say your point of view, and take the project forward from there. And that credibility is also delivering on whatever you thought. Don't be accountable. If you said you're going to do something, you have to do it. And that credibility builds on that. That's how I've survived Silicon Valley.
This was extremely valuable. Actually, some of the problems that I was sharing as the barriers before seem to be almost directly answered with some of the solutions that you provided. And I really appreciate that what we are doing right now. It's not only sharing wisdom in some abstract way, but kind of also already responding to each other. And giving some solutions and suggestions, regardless where we are in our careers, whether we feel we are beginning or at the end, and regardless of the industry or the field where we are. So this is extremely helpful. But I could see from all these examples that you shared, there is a lot of internal wisdom and solutions that you are coming through your own experience. And I think it would be good at this point to see if maybe, as Sandy and I responded, there was some external influence, some models, somebody that you look up to as you were developing in your role as a leader and the woman in our field. So I would like to start with Rang with the first answer to this question.
Okay, I look at role model not as someone like God, but it's really people I meet and I get inspiration from. So in terms of role model, in all aspects of every stage of my professional life, I encounter women who are really giving me a lot of inspiration. So the present co-host or co-keynote speakers included, Sandy and Sanda, different aspects of my professional life. When I interact with them, I learn from them. I just feel that they're also my role model. Their attitudes toward life and work, I get to know them in a personal level. to some extent, and I just get, really enjoy being sort of interacting with them and get advice from them. I know that when you ask advice, Sandy and Sandra will, definitely without any reservation will tell you what it is, and will just, be very honest and be also very realistic. And what do you want to do? So that kind of attitude and also their integrity in terms of at work and in terms of their skillful interaction with colleagues. In some awkward situation, they're able to navigate that. So I get, also this friendly understanding from both of them. So I would say two of them were having my role models. Again, I'm not putting them on a pedestal very high, but this is true. Also, I do want to point out my last few years I've been partnering with Eileen Martin, who's the director of Harvard Conway Library of Medicine. And I also get a lot of inspiration from interacting with her. And she has a tough job. She was able to really renovate Conway Library to be making a community center. Harvard Library tend to be closed to people, but now they're creating a more friendly community space, and it's all her hard work. But she also not only had the conviction to work vision for the future. I know personally she has a lot of family health issues that she needs to support, ranging from her mom, 96 years old, and her husband, which is also high age. And she has been able to balancing taking care of family, but also being able to do great work. So that's definitely she's definitely one of my role models or mentors. Thank you.
Thanks, Trong. Maybe Sarah?
Sure, happy to go. I've had so many wonderful role models, and I think one of the things that's interesting is this is really the profession I've been in almost my entire professional life. But I think what I love so much about the library world is that our colleagues are our mentors, that we really, they're so often that you can reach out to anyone. And I can't say anytime I've ever reached out to anyone and asked for advice or support that someone said, I don't have time or I'm not going to do that. We just are really a giving and supportive profession. But the folks that I would actually name by name that were really important to my career, probably the first one is Susan Hildreth. And I met Susan about 25 years ago. She was on the panel for a job I did not get, which is always interesting when you create a great relationship with someone when you weren't successful. It was a job that I'm pretty glad I didn't get, but at the time I wanted it. But Susan's been very supportive all of those years. And probably most people on this call know her. So I worked with her. I was a state librarian when she was the California state librarian. So we had some time together. I thought she did an absolutely phenomenal job in leadership as the IMLS director. And she's just been always someone who, and especially as I've looked for a few jobs, you're like, yeah, you should go for that. And she's like, yeah, don't do that. She usually kind of understands some things that not everyone else might not know. And then the other person I would say that was a huge role model for me is Dr. Yvonne Chandler from University of North Texas. And I imagine many of you probably knew Yvonne too. And I think what I say about her for the role model is just just such a tremendous commitment to our profession and making sure that we had, she and I started working on creating a more diverse workforce in, we got an IMLS grant in 2004. And she was just tireless about making, really improving our profession and holding people accountable. And just, there are literally thousands of people who are librarians because of Dr. Chandler. I would say, though, that I think that talking about the work-life balance, Yvonne and I were very good friends, and I think she's a lesson in making sure we do work-life balance, because I think she's a person, and I think we can recognize this, that sometimes people are asked to give and give and give and never take the time they need for themselves. So
Yeah.
is my answer about role models.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, go ahead, Tiffany.
Well, I definitely had a mentor starting out fresh out of library school. I was mentored by Ms. Gladys Bell, who is very instrumental in helping with the Black Caucus of the American Library Association and the JCLC, the Joint Council of Librarians of Color. And she actually paid for my membership in Black Caucus as a student, and then my first couple of years, and really got me involved in the larger library world. And so I feel like that was very instrumental in me gaining that confidence to sign up for things, to volunteer, to serve. She helped me, or pushed me to, get my first, submit for my first written piece to be published. And so I do think, I just want to echo that the importance of mentorship, as Dr. Hirsch and Sanda was talking about at the beginning, is very important, especially me being a woman of color. I think to see other folks working and doing things, and sometimes having that extra hand. And I like how Sarah said, sometimes when you get mentors throughout, then if something does happen throughout your career, or if, you have some challenging moments, then you're able to have that small group discussion, sort of like we're doing here, but not so public, where you can kind of call on your folks to, kind of have some coaching and be mentored through certain situations throughout your career.
Great. I think my contribution would be that I think of role models and mentors potentially as two very different people. And so, for example, I might use a role model as Fred Rogers, or, someone out there that I think is living a good life and, has the right character and that I like to emulate. And some of my mentors have also been role models. Eugenie Prime at Hewlett-Packard Labs. I can remember her comforting me after one of these daunting technology meetings. I had gone from the library out into the enterprise technology group to help them launch the employee portal and search engine. This was all very new. And she was persuaded and convinced that I could bring my systems librarian and cataloging skills to this group to help them understand metadata and discovery and finding. And I came back nearly in tears because I thought they were just too big. It was very early in my career. And she told me something that echoes in my head every week, if not every day, which is they don't need another one of you at the table, another one of them at the table. They have plenty of them. What they need is you. And I think Tiffany said something like that, is to remember what you bring is unique to you, and they have plenty of their skills. They don't have your skills. And so I hear that, and that was really, truly, she was a role model and a mentor. And then I'll finish up by saying some people, like that boss that used to yell at me, align. I hated meeting with him. I hated him as a boss, but I hear the echoes of his advice in my head on a regular basis. And sometimes your worst critics can be your best mentors. And I do listen to the people who report to me on a regular basis. At Elation, we have a whole culture around feedback and candor, and it goes 360 up and down. And some of the best mentoring I've gotten is from feedback from the people who report to me on what I could do better.
I can't resist now to reflect again. There is some magic happening between the stories that I see in my mind and how that puts it nicely into a condensed message. Because if you remember, I was telling about two people who were models for me. Well, actually, one was more of a Fred Rogers type of model, that's a sports person, but the mentor was my advisor in Syracuse, Martha Dosa. So just kind of, again, helped me to see the pattern that I had more of a story about, but I see more the meaning of role model and mentor. So thanks again for helping us, connect the dots.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you. And so we have one last question. We're nearing the end already. I could keep going. I'm really enjoying the conversation. But I'm going to pose to you the same question that Sandra and I answered, and that is, as you advance through your career, how are you paying it forward and paving the way for other women to succeed? So I'd like to start this question with Sarah.
All right, thank you. This is such a great question, and I guess the paying it forward one is, really early in my career, people said, "Oh, you really should go to library school, and you'll be a great librarian." And I at the time I lived in the state of Nevada, and I was the very first person to get a scholarship to go to library school. So I felt really strongly about doing a pay it forward there. So I work in a number of ways to continue to find scholarship money. In the state of Nevada, we were able to put a license plate, a special license plate together to support that. And every avenue I can find for that. And then through a number of opportunities, I was successful with being the principal investigator for 2 IMLS Laura Bush Awards, hoping to help and see San Jose get one, partnership with Simmons also. I think we need to just really make sure that there's a lot of support for entry to library school and taking away those barriers. We can do a lot more, but it's been important to me. And then I think that paving the way is, and I think this will resonate with many of the things that you've heard, is my children are grown now, but I was a library director with small children, and my husband had a very demanding job too. And it was just so hard. Invariably, like I need to be presenting a budget, and one of the kids was sick, and what do you do? So one of the things I've tried to really model, and this was really presented really eloquently by Sonia Sotomayor, is that we have, as women, we need to be really supportive of that in the environment, finding ways that we let people be mothers and spouses and partners and daughters. We have to make that space, and we have to make sure that many critical things will have to come up, but there's ways for us to step in and support and trying our very best to never make people feel guilty about having to be that caregiver role, because we need to do that.
One of the, thank you, Sarah, for raising that. One of the best programs that came at the perfect time was when I was at the University of Arizona as a faculty member. They had this amazing program that they provided childcare for very cheap for faculty, or maybe for staff too, but I was faculty, so that when I was by myself and had little babies at home and I needed to go teach my class, I could get certified childcare that was really affordable. That was genius. And I was so grateful for that. Anyway, so yes, things like that are super important. Deb, would you like to go next?
Yes, sure. My contribution has to do with sort of what I feel like is just this one-on-one personal responsibilities. So I reach out to some of the younger women, and they're almost all younger than me at the company these days. And if I see somebody doing something, I will reach out and say, can I give you some feedback? An example was, we had a woman who did a presentation, and I knew that she knew this stuff up and down and backwards, but she was cradling these index cards in her hand like they were going to save her. And I encouraged her next time to put away the index cards, wing it from her heart. It was a topic that I knew was really important to her. So I think that kind of encouragement, just one-on-one, and very, very specific to what happened in that situation could help someone make that next step forward rather than some big, huge initiative. So I try to do that. Maybe that's my own excuse for not leading a big initiative, but that's the way I do it at my company. And there are a lot of examples of younger women working in technology where I feel that that's helpful. And then the last thing, I'm going to use this as an opportunity because I do think that we're talking about the librarian profession. I launched an initiative at my company where we are providing our data catalog software to library and information schools. And we started with the University of Wisconsin in Milwaukee at the School of Information Science there. And somebody mentioned, I think it was you, Sarah, about misinformation, and we should really be working in there. I'll introduce you to the professor there that we're working with. She has a number of classes in disinformation and misinformation. So I think some people are doing that. And then the reason that we're doing that is that we're finding that the software that we deliver into the enterprise is actually best managed by someone with an information science background, with a library background. So we have now 4 librarians working in my company in various roles: data privacy, customer success. And we're hoping that we can offer a path for librarians, including women, into the world of data management, data usage, and all of this towards data literacy and the proper and ethical use of data. So anyway, that's a big initiative. And if anybody's interested in it, please reach out to me.
Thank you so much, Deb. That's great. And Rong, would you like to go next?
Okay, so I work in academia. So my surrounding people, students and colleagues. So in terms of my way of paying it forward and pave the way, definitely working with students, especially a doctoral student, I get to know them more in a very personal level. So we become sort of colleagues instead of their students, and I'm the faculty. So I do know they face the same kind of challenges that we, when we were young, face, with childcare and things like that. I have several doctoral students give birth during some of them give 2 babies during their doctoral study, 3 babies. So while managing a job and while managing a doctoral study. So for me is to really make sure they're still able to stay on track with their study, but also not, have the enough understanding of supporting them with their sort of life. We have women colleagues who are really brilliant and very, have a lot of talent. But, there's also a way to interact with them. I'm also mentoring some junior faculty to really learn about, there's life challenges that they need to be able to survive, sustain, thrive, and then succeed. It's not like immediately you have huge successful, sort of a part, and then you don't need to go through. We have to all go through some challenges and hardship in order to reach some successful outcome. But the journey itself sometimes is better than the outcome. Of course, we all want people to succeed. The students, I have people who actually graduate from doctoral or master program not having jobs. That's the reality. With this, I keep in touch with them. I try to bring them in when there's opportunities for them. So that's a way to sort of, I also still interact with my doctoral graduates who's at, Kuwait University. We work together on things. So it's not just, okay, you're done with the program, you're gone. So another thing I'm actually helping at the community level is this effort of RDMA. I'm glad that Deb mentioned some data initiative. This is actually data ethics big data management in terms of from the point of view of data literacy, things like that. We have been doing it through our efforts. So we do encourage a lot of women instructors to actually be active in RDMLA community, because it used to be there's a stereotype is librarians are not mathematician, they're not going to be good with statistics, and data science involves statistics, and women are not good with math. There's again stereotypical thing, and we want to actually say no. We have very talented people who work in the hard sciences or other things to promote data services. So that's me.
Thank you so much. We've got 5 more minutes. So Tiffany, you get to bring us home, and then Anthony's going to wrap us all up.
All right. Well, I would just say some of the things that you all have already discussed, definitely formal and informal mentorship. I'm an adjunct instructor. So I get the opportunity to mentor students all the time, as Rong and Sandy mentioned. I also have had the opportunity to work with a lot of diverse authors and diverse books. I do a lot of work in that space, and that adds a different sect onto it. But that allows me to mentor, work with sponsors to provide a lot of sponsorships and information to a lot of authors, especially diverse authors who are trying to get their work published or are trying to, get their works out there. And that allows me to help and work in that space as well. And also just listening to all of you, just in taking risks in your career, doing what you want to do. A lot of times, I was told kind of at the very beginning that, you really needed to focus, you needed to stay in a lane. And I think just by literally making your own path, doing what you want to do, going for it, as it looks like all of you have done. I think that just provides, pathways, encouragement, and the fact that you can do what you want to do with your career for those who may be coming after.
Thank you so much, Tiffany. Thank you to all of you. It has been such an honor and I've learned so much from all of you, and I've loved hearing all of your different perspectives. So thank you so much for joining us out of your extremely busy days. I know Sandra and I really enjoyed talking with you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'm going to turn it over to Anthony to conclude our symposium today.
Well, thank you very much. And again, special thanks to Sanda and Sandy and our distinguished panel of guests. We've been working on this EDI series for the last year and a half, and I'm just always so inspired and impressed by the leaders that make the time to share your wisdom and expertise with us. So thank you again so much. And I also want to emphasize that for equity, diversity, and inclusion in general, for those of us that are in leadership positions, to create the space and they allocate the resources and time to bring people like we have today to share so much wisdom and thoughts about their work experience. Also, kudos to Alfredo Alcantar and Vivian Zuo and Iori Tokunaga. So Alfredo is our Canvas extraordinaire, so kind, so gentle, so organized. So thank you for keeping us afloat, Alfredo. Vivian, who is our events coordinator, does a magnificent job. Iori Tokunaga, who is our EDI student writer, and Perla Marquez, who is with us, who is live tweeting this right now, and is also our social media student assistant. So again, thank you for joining us. The full transcript, recording, and summary of today's proceedings will be posted on our website within the next few weeks. We have an EDI library that, Alfredo, if you can drop that link into the chat, has a ongoing, amazing set of resources as we honor EDI or Heritage Month every month. And so and also there's a Women's History Month Resource Center. So please, Alfredo, drop that link in as well. So we also had one last year, and this will add to that resource center, of course. Also subscribe to our EDI YouTube channel. So again, Alfredo, if you can drop that in there, all of the recordings of all of our EDI symposiums are available. And there's also a link to Sanda's Women's Coalition that Alfredo is also going to drop in the chat. Finally, please join the iSchool for upcoming future free symposiums, including Library 2.0 Mental Health and Wellness, Libraries Workers Thriving in Uncertain Times, happening I think in 2 weeks, right? Sandy, hard to believe. Ukrainian libraries during the war, a year in on April 5th, Deaf Culture and Community on April 13th, Earth Day on April 22nd, Asian and Pacific American Heritage Month on May 26th, and Juneteenth Day on June 20th. So with that being said, thank you again for joining us and have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Take care.